Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Ava for this one. Nick activates Shadowspear to make all Amy's permanents lose indestructible. Then Amy equips Darksteel Axe onto her grizzly bears. Is Darksteel Axe able to be destroyed? Okay, so to understand why this would even be a question, let's review a little bit of information on how continuous effects work. I've made plenty of videos where I talk about this before, but in situations where there's a continuous effect that says a permanent has an ability, and then another continuous effect that says that permanent loses that ability, then the answer is that whichever continuous effect has a later timestamp wins. I'll link an example video in the description so you can see what I mean. Now, the other important rule is that when an equipment becomes attached to a creature, it gets a new timestamp. Putting these two pieces of information together, it's easy to see how someone could look at that and think it would mean attaching Darksteel Axe to a creature after Shadowspear was activated would result in it becoming indestructible again. In fact, it's not unusual to have several comments asking variations of this question whenever I post a video on a similar topic. Well, based on the way that I described that, you might have deduced that this is, in fact, not how it works. And indeed, that deduction is correct, but the reasoning is kind of subtle. The key is that timestamps are only important when you're applying continuous effects that modify the characteristics of objects. But there isn't a continuous effect that wants to give the indestructible ability to Darksteel Axe. It just has that ability normally. When you're determining the characteristics of a permanent, you do that by starting with what's actually printed on it and then applying any continuous effects that want to modify those characteristics. Therefore, it doesn't matter what the timestamp on Darksteel Axe is. The Shadowspear activation will always act to remove the indestructible ability printed on it. Well, for an example that actually would work, let's consider this Shield of Kaldra. Notice that it does not have the indestructible ability itself. It has an ability that creates a continuous effect, which gives it that indestructible ability. Therefore, when we're determining whether Shield of Kaldra has indestructible or not, we apply that continuous effect and the one from activating Shadowspear in timestamp order. We noted before that equipment do get a new timestamp upon becoming attached to a creature, which means that if that happened for Shield of Kaldra after the ability of Shadowspear resolved, then the continuous effect that wants to give indestructible will apply after the one that wants to remove indestructible, meaning Shield of Kaldra would indeed have indestructible in this case. Of course, the Shadowspear player could just activate again, creating another continuous effect with yet a later timestamp that would remove the indestructible ability again. All of the preceding discussion applies equally well to the ability from Shield of Kaldra that grants indestructible to the equipped creature. So that result would shake out exactly the same way. The equipped creature would have indestructible if Shield of Kaldra became equipped after the Shadowspear ability resolved, and it would not have it if those happened in the other order. This is, of course, the natural result that I think most Magic players would expect if you asked them what they thought would happen, and that's the reason why equipment get a new timestamp upon becoming attached to a new creature in the first place. The fact that the Shield of Kaldra can also have the indestructible ability is admittedly a little bit weirder, but it's a consequence of that previous ruling. It's pretty difficult to write a rule that differentiated between those two types of continuous effects in a natural way, so I think WotC just accepted that it would be a little weird in cases like that. It's much more common for an equipment to give an ability to the equipped permanent rather than to give one to themselves, so I think that was a reasonable call, since the intuitive answer is correct in the vast majority of cases. If you're going to use this trick, let's note that the equipment needs to become attached to a creature in order to get a new timestamp. In other words, it needs to start out not attached and end up being attached. If Shield of Kaldra was already attached to a grizzly bear's, you could, of course, activate its equip ability targeting that same bear. But doing so would not cause it to get a new timestamp because it would not become attached to the creature in that case. Let's close out with one last challenge question to test your understanding. Nick activates Shadowspear to make all of Amy's permanents lose indestructible. Then Amy equips Darksteel Plate from some other creature onto her grizzly bears. Is Darksteel Plate indestructible? What about grizzly bears? Well, let's first observe that Darksteel Plate, like Darksteel Axe, has the indestructible ability naturally. There's no continuous effect giving it that ability, so the only thing of relevance is the Shadowspear ability that's going to make it lose indestructible. On the other hand, the Darksteel Plate has an ability that generates a continuous effect, which gives the indestructible ability to grizzly bears. Since the Darksteel Plate got a new timestamp upon becoming attached to the Grizzly Bears, that will apply after the Shadowspear ability, meaning the Grizzly Bears will be indestructible. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.